Imagine this. You wake up and the decimal point in your bank account has shifted 6 places to the right. A moonshot crypto bet, a side hustle that finally caught fire, or an inheritance from a relative you never knew. It feels like divine providence, doesn't it? But Machiavelli has a cold reminder for you. Fortune is a fickle mistress. She smiles on the bold, but she executes the unprepared. Sudden wealth doesn't buy you freedom. It buys you gravity. A crushing weight that exposes every flaw, every vice, and every fake friend hiding in your shadow. Statistically, some of you watching this are already holding that winning ticket. But here is the dark truth. The faster you rise, the harder the fall. Most overnight millionaires end up broken, divorced, or looking down the barrel of a midlife ruin within 5 years. They mistake money for wisdom. They forget that holding power is 100 times harder than seizing it. If you want to keep what is yours, you must learn the art of the invisible. Welcome to the Invisible Driver, where there are truths that society doesn't want you to know. Most people believe that money is a shield. They think that once they have the millions, the world becomes soft. They are wrong. In reality, sudden wealth is an accelerant. It's like pouring high-octane fuel onto a flickering candle. If the wick isn't strong enough, the flame doesn't grow, it explodes. Psychologists call this wealth shock. Your nervous system isn't designed for infinite choices. When you can go anywhere, buy anything, and silence anyone, the boundaries that define who you are begin to dissolve. Without boundaries, the ego expands until it hits a wall. Look at the countless lottery winners who ended up working at gas stations just 3 years after hitting a $100 million jackpot. It wasn't the taxes that killed them. It was the gravity. It was the weight of 1,000 new requests, the pressure of a lifestyle they hadn't earned the discipline to manage, and the internal rot of having everything while being nothing. The lesson is simple, yet brutal. Wealth does not change you, it reveals you. If you are undisciplined, money will make you a chaotic wreck. If you are insecure, money will make you a paranoid recluse. So, before you upgrade your life, you must first upgrade your defense. Because as you sit there, staring at those new zeros in your account, there is a target on your back that you cannot yet see. The world is about to start looking at you differently. And the only way to survive that gaze is to make sure they see exactly what you want them to see. And that brings us to the most powerful weapon in a prince's arsenal, the art of the mask. The moment the world knows you are wealthy, you lose the greatest asset a man can possess: anonymity. In the halls of power, Machiavelli observed that visibility is the precursor to betrayal. When you flaunt your success, you aren't just wearing a crown, you're painting a target. This is the law of silence. But silence isn't just about keeping your mouth shut. It's about the strategic construction of a social mask. You must learn to live in the appearance of normality. Why? Because human nature is built on comparison. The moment your neighbor, your cousin, or your best friend senses your life has accelerated past theirs, a chemical reaction occurs. It's called resentment. They don't see your luck or your hard work. They only see their own inadequacy reflected in your new Rolex. To protect your fortune, you must deny them that reflection. Take the Rothschild family. For centuries, they moved the needle of global history, financing empires and wars. Yet, their patriarchs often lived in modest quarters, avoiding the gaudy displays of the nouveau riche. They understood that influence is most effective when it is invisible. By looking average, they remained untouchable. Compare that to the tragic saga of Jack Whittaker. After winning over $300 million, he became a local spectacle. He wore a 10-gallon hat and handed out cash like candy. He thought he was being generous. The world saw a golden goose. In a few years, he was robbed of $500,000 from his car. His granddaughter was found dead, and he died broken. His mistake? He wore his crown in a forest full of wolves. The lesson is this: if you win big tomorrow, drive your old car for another year. Keep your same gym membership. Wear the same frayed hoodie to the grocery store. Not because you are cheap, but because you are a strategist. You are buying time to build your fortress before the siege begins. Most people think the first person they should tell is their mother or their spouse. They are wrong. Telling your inner circle before your legal structure is ready is like opening the gates of a city before the walls are built. The first call you make shouldn't be to share the news. It should be to hire your generals. And if you think a high street bank manager is enough to guard your kingdom, you're already losing the war. Which leads us to the blueprints of your invisible fortress, the legal walls that turn your money into a ghost. In the eyes of the law, there are two types of people: the vulnerable and the invisible. Most people spend their lives building wealth in their own name. They want the deed to the house, the title to the car, and the bank statement to all bear their signature. In the world of power, this is a fatal error. Machiavelli taught that a prince must build fortresses, not of stone, but of strategy. Your fortress is the separation of your identity from your assets. You must stop owning things and start controlling them. The wealthy in America do not own their homes. A trust owns the home. They do not own their businesses. A holding company in a tax haven state like Wyoming or Nevada owns the business. Why? Because you cannot sue a ghost. If a litigious predator or a disgruntled former friend looks for your name in public records, they should find nothing but a desert. Think of it like a medieval castle. If you put all your gold in a wooden chest in the middle of the village square, it's only a matter of time before someone takes it. But if you place that gold behind 3 layers of moats, drawbridges, and stone walls, the cost of attacking you becomes higher than the potential reward. This is the essence of asset protection. A common mistake is thinking you can do this later. You tell yourself, I'll set up an LLC once I buy the mansion. By then, it's too late. The paper trail is already bloodied with your name. The time to build the moat is before the gold arrives. The lesson here is profound. Ownership is a liability. Control is power. When you own nothing, you have nothing to lose in the eyes of the court, the IRS, or the envious. But when you control everything through a series of legal entities, you move through the world with the weight of a king and the footprint of a shadow. But a fortress is only as strong as the men who guard it. You cannot man these walls alone. You are a sovereign, and a sovereign requires a cabinet of ministers who are smarter, colder, and more experienced than he is. So, who do you trust to hold the keys? Because the wrong general won't just fail to defend your kingdom, he might just hand the keys to your enemies. Most advisors at big-name banks are just salesmen in expensive suits, looking to dump your fortune into funds that pay them the highest kickback. A prince does not buy what is sold. He buys what is necessary. The mistake most new money Americans make is hiring their friends or family members to manage the books. They think loyalty is found in blood. It isn't. Loyalty in the world of high finance is found in professional ethics and high retainers. Think of the athletes and lottery winners who went bankrupt because they let their uncle or childhood best friend handle their investments. These generals weren't evil. They were simply out of their depth, and they drowned the kingdom along with themselves. The lesson? Hire for competence, not for comfort. Pay for the best because the cost of a top-tier attorney is nothing compared to the cost of a single, catastrophic lawsuit or an IRS audit that freezes your life for a decade. A sovereign doesn't save pennies on his defense. Machiavelli warned that a wise prince must extinguish internal dangers before he ever looks toward external ones. In the architecture of your new life, there is no internal danger more treacherous than debt. Most people view debt as a tool, or worse, a lifestyle. They carry credit card balances and high-interest car loans like badges of modern living. But to a sovereign, debt is not a tool. It is a rebellion within your walls. Think of high-interest debt, anything above 8 or 10%, as a leak in your fortress. It doesn't matter how much gold you pour into the treasury if the floor is porous. Compound interest is the only force in the universe that moves faster than human greed. A 20% interest rate on a credit card will consume a $1 million fortune faster than a thief in the night. In America, we are conditioned to leverage everything. We are told to make our money work for us. But you cannot command an army while your own boots are tied together. Before you invest a single dollar in the S&P 500 or buy a single Bitcoin, you must crush your high-interest obligations. Paying off a 20% credit card is the only guaranteed, risk-free 20% return you will ever find on this planet. It is a tactical victory that secures your perimeter. I've seen entrepreneurs hit a massive payday, only to keep their high-interest business loans for the tax write-off. This is a peasant's logic. They are paying the bank $5 to save $1 in taxes. They are keeping a traitor in their court because he occasionally cleans the floors. The lesson is absolute. Eliminate the debt that drains your spirit and your capital. Kill the rebellion while you have the overwhelming force of your new wealth to do so. Once your debts are slain, you stop thinking like a servant who owes time to a master. You start thinking like a ruler who owns his future. But once the internal rebellion is crushed and your walls are secure, a new and much more subtle threat will emerge. It won't come from banks or the IRS. It will come from the people you love. It will come with a smile, a handshake, and a business opportunity. And if you don't know how to say no with the cold precision of a surgeon, your heart will bleed your treasury dry before the year is out. Machiavelli famously wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both. In the context of sudden wealth, this translates to a hard truth. It is better to be respected for your boundaries than exploited for your kindness. When you rise, those around you don't see your strategy. They see your surplus. Friends, cousins, and old acquaintances will suddenly develop emergencies or groundbreaking business ideas. They aren't evil, they are human. They feel entitled to a piece of your luck because they knew you when you had nothing. But if you become the bank for your inner circle, you are not a savior. You are a victim in waiting. The moment you lend money to a friend, the relationship dies. It transforms into a transaction where you are the master and they are the servant. If they fail to pay you back, they will avoid you out of shame or resent you out of guilt. Either way, you lose the person. This is why a prince practices strategic compassion. The rule is simple. Never lend, only gift, and only once. If a family member truly needs help, a medical crisis, or a real catastrophe, decide on a sum you are willing to lose forever. Hand it to them and say these exact words. I am giving you this because I love you. It is a gift, not alone. But understand this. This is the only time I can do this. Do not ask me again, because the answer will be no, and I don't want that to ruin what we have. By doing this, you perform a single strike of mercy. You solve the problem, but you also destroy the expectation of future payments. You reset the power dynamic. You remain the sun warm from a distance, but untouchable up close. Look at the legends of the ring. Mike Tyson earned over $300 million. He didn't lose it all on mansions and tigers. He lost a massive portion to a village of dependents, people who lived off his shadow until the lights went out. When the money vanished, so did the village. They didn't love Mike. They loved the ATM. The lesson is this: boundaries are the highest form of self-love. If you cannot say no to a cousin, you will never be able to say no to a bad market. But staying rich isn't just about stopping the outflow of cash to others. It's about stopping the internal rot of idleness. Many people think the goal of wealth is to never work again. Machiavelli would tell you that is the fastest way to lose your mind and your kingdom. Because the only thing more dangerous than a hungry friend is a bored mind.
The average person views wealth as an exit ramp, a way to finally stop doing anything useful. They dream of a beach, a drink, and total idleness. But Machiavelli observed that idleness makes even the strongest men soft and vulnerable. If you quit your life the moment you hit the jackpot, you aren't gaining freedom. You are entering a state of decay. When you have nothing to do, your ego becomes your only occupation. You start to obsess over trivialities. Your discipline erodes and you become a target for every impulse that enters your mind. The prince who abandons his duties because his treasury is full is a prince who will soon be overthrown by his own boredom. This is the sovereignty of work. You don't keep your job because you need the paycheck. You keep working because work is the whetstone that keeps your mind sharp. However, the nature of that work must change. In the United States, we talk about "fuck you money." Most people use it as a weapon to walk away. But the true strategist uses it as a tool to stay on his own terms. Imagine walking into your office knowing that you could buy the building and fire everyone in it. Your fear vanishes. Your stutter disappears. You become the most honest, most powerful version of yourself. You aren't a servant of the corporation anymore. You are a sovereign entity choosing to engage. Look at Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett. These men have enough wealth to fund entire civilizations, yet they wake up and go to work. Why? Because they understand that momentum is a form of protection. A moving object is harder to hit. A building man is a focused man. The lesson? Do not quit working. Quit only the parts of your life that drain your spirit or limit your autonomy. Use your wealth to buy back your time, and then spend that time building something that matters. Sovereignty isn't the absence of work. It is the absolute control over what you build. But even the most focused builder needs a kingdom that can stand on its own. You cannot spend your life guarding every single dollar. You need a system, a silent machine that generates power while you sleep. It is time to move from the man to the machine. It is time to organize your soldiers into a formation that can survive any war the market throws at you. Machiavelli warned that a prince must never rely solely on the favor of fortune, for she is unpredictable. Instead, he must rely on structure systems that endure long after the initial excitement has faded. Wealth without a system is merely a countdown to poverty. To stay rich, you must stop being a consumer and start being a governor.
You must organize your capital into 4 strategic divisions, each with a specific mission to defend your borders. First, your infantry. This is your broad market equity low-cost index funds that capture the growth of human ambition. They are your primary force, marching forward year after year, averaging the 9% returns that build empires over decades. They expand your territory while you sleep. Second, your walls. This is real estate. In the eyes of history, land is the only true patrimony. It is tangible, it produces yield, and it provides the ultimate tax shelter. A prince who owns no land is a prince who lives in someone else's kingdom.
Whether it's multifamily units or commercial space,
These walls provide a buffer against the inflation that eats the wealth of the common man. Third, your scouts. This is your venture capital and your digital assets, Bitcoin and Ethereum. Machiavelli admired boldness, but he despised recklessness. You do not bet the kingdom on the scouts. You allocate 5 to 10% of your force to explore these new territories. If they strike gold, your empire doubles. If they fall, your fortress still stands. Finally, your treasury. This is your liquid reserve cash and short-term bonds. This is your peace fund. In a market crash, the man with cash is not a victim. He is a predator. While the world panics and sells its ruins for pennies, the prince with a full treasury buys their empires at a discount. The mistake most Americans make is falling in love with a single division.
they put everything into the scouts and lose it all in a market correction.
Or they hide everything in the treasury and let inflation rot their purchasing power. The lesson? A balanced formation is invincible. Do not chase the highest return. Chase the highest probability of endurance. Your goal is not to win the game once it is to stay in the game forever. But even with a perfect army, there is a silent tax collector waiting at the gate. A vampire that doesn't care about your strategy or your walls. If you don't know how to mask your trail from the state, your fortress will be dismantled, one brick at a time by the very system that claims to protect it. It is time to talk about the ultimate exit and the art of the ghost.
In the world of the prince, there is no such thing as a neutral party.
There is only the sovereign and the state is a hungry entity. Machiavelli knew that a ruler who does not protect his treasury from the vampires of his own administration will soon find himself ruling over a graveyard. In the modern American landscape, that vampire is the tax code. If you manage your wealth as an individual, you are a target. You will be taxed on what you earn, what you spend, what you own, and eventually, what you leave behind. This is not just an expense, it is a systematic dismantling of your fortress. A wise strategist doesn't evade taxes. That is the path of the foolish and the incarcerated. Instead, he outstructures them. You must learn the language of the exit strategy. In the United States, this begins with domestic migration.
Why pay a 13% state income tax in California or New York when you can fortify your position in Texas, Florida, or Wyoming? A sovereign moves to where the laws favor his growth. He uses tools like the 1031 exchange for real estate or opportunity zones to defer and eliminate capital gains. He treats the tax code not as a set of rules to follow, but as a map of loopholes to navigate. But true sovereignty goes beyond borders. The ultimate exit is the ability to become a global ghost. This means diversifying your residency and your citizenship. If your entire life is tied to one jurisdiction, you are a hostage to their whims. If they decide to hike taxes to 50% or freeze assets in a crisis, you are trapped.
A prince always has a secondary fortress, a second passport, a foreign bank account, a place where the reach of his home state ends. The mistake many Americans make is thinking that patriotism requires financial martyrdom. It doesn't.
Machiavelli's primary virtue was virtù, the ability to adapt to the times to preserve the state. Your family is your state. Your wealth is your treasury. The lesson? Mobility is the ultimate form of protection. If you can move your capital and your person at a moment's notice, you are untamable. You stop being a subject and start being a player on the global stage. But once you have secured the exit, once the walls are high and the taxes are managed, a final question remains. What is all this for? Is it just to die with the biggest number? Or is there a way to turn this temporary fortune into something that echoes through history? We have reached the final law, the law that separates the rich from the immortal. Most men chase wealth so they can indulge in the vulgarity of luxury.
They want the flashy watches, the supercars, and the superficial validation of strangers. Machiavelli would view this as a tragic waste of potential. Luxury is a fleeting dopamine hit. It is a fire that consumes the very wood it needs to survive. Legacy, however, is a monument. The final law of sudden fortune is to choose legacy over luxury. Real wealth is not measured by what you spend, but by the weight of your influence and the endurance of your name. Once your fortress is secure, once your generals are in place and your exit is prepared, you must look beyond your own lifespan. A prince who only cares for his own comfort is a prince history forgets. A sovereign who uses his capital to fund ideas, to build institutions, or to secure the future of his bloodline for generations. That is a man who achieves a form of immortality. Think of the great American families, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Fords.
They didn't just buy stuff. They built the infrastructure of society. Their names are carved into the stones of universities and hospitals, not because they were charitable in the soft, modern sense, but because they understood that power is most stable when it is embedded in the foundation of the world. The mistake is thinking that you need billions to start. You don't. Legacy begins with the philosophy you instill in your children and the causes you defend when no one is looking. It is about moving from "what can I buy" to "what can I build that will outlive me?" The lesson? Wealth is a tool, not a trophy. Use it to buy your freedom first, then use it to buy your place in history. As you navigate this new world of sudden fortune, remember, the world will urge you to scream your name from the rooftops. Don't. Let your silence be your strength. Let your structure be your shield. And let your actions be your legacy. You have the gold. Now, you must decide if you have the soul of a king or the heart of a peasant. If you are ready to take the first step in building your invisible fortress, to move from the chaos of luck to the precision of strategy, the path is open. But remember, once you enter this world, there is no going back. Welcome to the aristocracy of silence.